Welcome to Quailcast, the podcast for bird lovers, conservationists, and anyone curious about the quirky world of quails. Whether we're diving into their unique behaviors, uncovering how these little ground dwellers shape ecosystems, or sharing tips to protect their habitats, we're here to celebrate nature's underrated heroes. But it's not just about quails. It's about the communities fighting to save them. Join us for stories of backyard rehabbers, scientists, and everyday folks making a difference. Ready to flock with us? Follow Quailcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your shows. And never miss a story. New episodes drop weekly, so hit subscribe. Visit quailcast.com for updates. And let's give quails the spotlight they deserve. Stay grounded.
Right. Get ready because we're diving deep into Japanese quail today.
Ooh, fun.
Yeah, looks like our listeners are thinking about raising these birds.
Yeah.
And we've got this really cool guide from the New South Wales Department of Primary Industries.
Nice.
So, let's get into it. I think we'll uncover some pretty interesting stuff along the way.
I'm ready.
So, one of the things that really stands out right away is just how adaptable these birds are.
Yeah, they are super hardy.
Yeah.
And they don't need a lot of space to thrive. It's amazing.
Yeah, that's a huge plus for people with smaller backyards or...
Absolutely. Even balconies, right?
Definitely. And they're not that expensive to keep either.
That's good.
Yeah.
And they're pretty disease resistant too, although, common poultry diseases can still affect them.
Yeah, you've got to be mindful.
So biosecurity is still important no matter what, right?
Always a good idea.
But they grow up fast.
They do.
Like they reach adulthood in 6 weeks. And
I know, it's crazy.
they can lay up to 200 eggs in their first year. It's impressive for such a small bird.
Yeah, it is. Speaking of size, did you know that the females are actually bigger than the males?
Yeah, it's true. It's kind of unusual in the bird world, isn't it?
Yeah, I always think of the rooster being bigger than the hen.
Right, exactly.
But the females, they can weigh up to 160 grams.
Yeah, that's about right. While the males usually only get to around 140 grams or so.
Huh, maybe they need all that extra weight for those eggs. They're like tiny egg-laying machines.
Maybe. They are pretty incredible.
So you can tell the males and females apart by their size.
Right.
But also by their appearance.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
The females have this beautiful light tan plumage with black speckles.
It's almost like camouflage, right?
Yeah, it's pretty cool. While the males have this really distinctive rusty brown coloring on their throat and breast.
Oh, yeah, that's right. And we can't forget about the male's cloacal gland.
Oh, yes. That's a unique feature. It's this little bump above their rear end.
I always think it looks kind of funny.
It is a bit odd.
Yeah.
But it's actually really important.
Yeah.
It's used to assess their reproductive fitness.
Yeah.
Basically, the bigger the gland, the better the breeder.
Really?
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Wow, nature has some pretty interesting ways of doing things, huh?
For sure.
Speaking of interesting, let's talk about those quail eggs. Those shells are beautiful.
Yeah, they're so unique.
They have this kind of mottled brown color.
Yeah, sometimes with this light blue chalky coating.
It's almost like they're little works of art.
And they really are. And get this, each hen lays eggs with a unique shell pattern.
What?
Yeah, it's like a fingerprint. And, some strains of quail even lay white eggs.
Oh, wow. I didn't know
They're
that.
pretty rare.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah, they're full of surprises, these quail.
They are. So we've got these beautiful eggs, and they're pretty small, right?
Yeah, tiny but mighty. Did you know those eggs only make up about 8% of the hen's body weight?
8%. Wow, that's pretty incredible. But they're fragile, right?
Yeah, very fragile. You got to handle them with care.
The guide actually emphasizes that quite a bit.
It's important.
Yeah.
You don't want to crack those precious eggs.
No, definitely not. Okay, so let's say we've got some quail,
Right.
and we're thinking about breeding them. What's the ideal setup?
Well, the guide suggests a ratio of 1 male to 2 or 3 females.
Okay, so like a little quail harem.
Sort of. This ratio helps maximize fertility.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and it helps keep the males from fighting too much.
So less drama in the quail coop.
Exactly. Too many roosters can lead to trouble.
Yeah, too many cooks in the kitchen, right.
Exactly. And it's worth noting that fertility declines as the birds get older.
Okay, so younger birds are better for breeding.
Generally, yeah. And one more thing, inbreeding is a big no-no.
Yeah, that's true for a lot of animals, right?
It is. Inbreeding can lead to genetic problems and weaker offspring.
So we want to avoid that. How do you even keep track of who's related to who in a quail flock?
Well, the guide recommends a few methods. You can use wing bands or leg bands.
Like little bracelets.
Yeah, kind of. Or you can use temporary markings with a bit of oil paint or even fingernail polish.
Oh, that's clever.
It's a simple way to keep track of their lineage.
All right, so now we've got our breeding pairs all sorted out.
Right.
And we're ready to start thinking about those eggs, right?
Exactly. And the first step is collecting those eggs regularly, multiple times a day, ideally.
Really? Wow, they're busy little layers.
They are.
Yeah.
And then it's all about proper storage. You want to keep those eggs at a steady 15 degrees Celsius.
That's a little warmer than my fridge.
Yeah, you don't want them too cold. A refrigerator is actually too cold for storing hatching eggs.
Oh, interesting. And of course, we got to handle those eggs like precious jewels, right?
Absolutely. Any cracks in those eggs won't hatch.
Yeah, no pressure. Right.
Yeah.
Okay, but I'm curious, how do you candle quail eggs? They've got those colored shells, right?
Yeah, it can be tricky, but it's still worth doing. You want to make sure you're incubating viable eggs.
Makes sense. And how long can you store them before putting them in the incubator?
Ideally, you shouldn't store them for more than a week.
Okay, good to know.
And speaking of incubators, cleanliness is super important.
Oh, yeah. I can't forget about that.
A dirty incubator can harbor all sorts of nasty bacteria and diseases.
Yeah, that's not what we want for those baby quail.
Definitely not. So thorough cleaning and disinfection after each use are absolutely essential.
So we're talking a deep clean every time.
You got it. And only clean eggs should go in the incubator. If you find any soiled eggs. Yeah, not ideal. The guide actually suggests using fine sandpaper to clean them, but never washing them.
Sandpaper? That's a new one.
I know, right? But washing can actually remove that protective coating on the shell.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah. And then there's this whole process of fumigating the eggs to prevent bacterial contamination.
Sounds intense.
It is. The guide details the exact steps and proportions of potassium permanganate and formalin to use.
Ooh, a little chemistry experiment.
It's important to get it right, though. Safety first.
Always, always. So we've got our clean eggs, our fumigated eggs. Now we're ready for the main event, right?
Incubation and hatching time.
Bring on the baby quail. But first, we got to understand our incubators, right?
Absolutely. And the guide explains the two main types, forced draft and still air.
So forced draft is like the high-tech option?
Yeah, kind of. It uses a fan to circulate the air, which helps create a more consistent temperature and humidity.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, it's generally the preferred method for optimal hatching rates. The guide actually gives you specific temperature and humidity guidelines for each stage of incubation.
Oh, nice. So it's like a step-by-step guide.
Exactly.
Okay, but what about those still air incubators?
There's still an option.
Yeah.
But it's definitely more challenging to get those settings just right. And you have to turn the eggs manually several times a day.
Oh, that's a lot of work.
It is. But it can be done.
So no matter which type of incubator we use, we've got to turn those eggs regularly. But why is that so important?
Well, it's not just about keeping them warm, though that is part of it. Turning the eggs actually prevents the embryo from sticking to the shell membrane.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, and it ensures that the embryo has access to a consistent supply of nutrients and oxygen.
It's like giving them a little turn and stretch every few hours, huh?
Exactly. Think of it like preventing bed sores for a tiny chick.
Oh, poor little guys.
Got to keep those embryos moving so they don't get stuck. You know, the guide also mentions that you can actually hatch Japanese quail eggs under a broody hen if you have one.
What? Really?
Yeah, it's true.
That's so cool, like a natural incubator.
Absolutely. Nature always finds a way.
What kind of hen is best for that?
Bantams are ideal because they're smaller
Right.
and less likely to accidentally crush those delicate quail eggs.
Oh, yeah. Got to be careful with those little guys. So let's say our eggs hatch.
Right.
We've got all these adorable, fluffy little chicks running around.
So cute.
But they're tiny
They are.
and delicate, right?
Very delicate. And they're super sensitive to temperature changes.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what do we need to know about brooding them and keeping them healthy?
Well, the guide really stresses the importance of proper brooding temperatures,
Right.
especially for the first few weeks. You want to start at around 35 degrees Celsius during the first week
Okay.
and gradually lower it as the chicks feather out.
So it's like a gradual weaning process.
Exactly. But how do you know if the temperature is just right? You're not going to put a tiny thermometer in there.
Right. No tiny quail thermometers.
Nope. But you can tell by watching their behavior.
Oh, okay.
If they're all huddled together under the heat source, they're too cold.
Okay.
But if they're spread out and looking comfortable, you're golden.
So they tell you what they need.
They do. They're pretty good communicators.
That's awesome. Are there any other special considerations for these little chicks?
Well, they can be prone to drowning in their water dishes.
But
Yeah, so a good tip is to use pebbles in their water troughs for the first week. It prevents them from getting in too deep and having an accidental swim.
that's a good idea.
And the guide recommends using specific types of litter, like wood shavings or sawdust.
Okay.
And surprisingly, paper for the first week.
Paper? Why paper?
Yeah, it sounds strange, but they recommend soft, rough types of paper, like paper towels. Apparently, chicks tend to sprawl out on hard, smooth surfaces, which isn't good for their development.
Oh, interesting.
And they mentioned that feather picking and cannibalism can be a problem.
Oh, no, that sounds awful.
It is, especially in crowded conditions.
So what can you do to prevent that?
Well, there are a few things you can try. The guide mentions beak trimming,
Okay.
but that's a bit of a controversial topic.
I can imagine.
Yeah. And adjusting their diet to include more fiber can help.
Okay.
And making sure they have enough space and reducing the light intensity can also help.
So it's like creating a calm and comfortable environment.
Exactly. It's all about minimizing stress and giving them what they need.
Makes sense. Okay, so we've covered brooding and chick care. Now let's talk about housing and equipment for the adult quail.
Right, let's do it.
What are some of the most important things to think about?
Well, insulation, ventilation, and predator protection are key.
Yeah, those are the basics, right?
Absolutely. And the design of their housing really depends on your purpose.
Okay.
Like commercial setups prioritize efficiency and use smaller cages to maximize egg production,
Right. Makes sense.
while hobbyists might opt for larger aviaries or deep litter pens to give their birds more space to roam.
So it depends on your goals.
Exactly. But even in those smaller cages, you still need to make sure the birds have enough space.
Yeah, how much space are we talking about?
The guide recommends at least 145 square centimeters of floor space per bird for solid floors,
Okay.
or slightly less for wire floors.
Interesting.
And they give you specific cage dimensions for optimal comfort and egg laying.
It's all about keeping those quail happy and productive, right?
Exactly. Happy birds lay more eggs.
That's a good motto. What about feeders and waterers?
Good question. They need about 1.25 to 2.5 centimeters of feeder space per bird,
Okay.
and at least 0.6 centimeters of trough space per bird for water. Nipple drinkers and cups can also work well.
So lots of options to choose from.
Yeah, it's about finding what works best for you and your birds.
All right, so we've got their housing sorted. What about light? Do they need a certain amount of light for optimal egg production?
They definitely do. Japanese quail are very sensitive to light cycles.
Interesting.
They need about 14 to 18 hours of light per day for maximum egg production and fertility.
Wow, that's a lot of light.
It is, and you will probably need to use supplemental lighting during the fall and winter months.
Right, when the days are shorter.
Exactly. So they're kind of like little solar-powered egg-laying machines.
I love that analogy. Is it the same for meat birds?
Actually, no. Quails raised for meat only need about 8 hours of low-intensity light per day.
Oh, interesting. So different lighting strategies for different purposes.
Exactly. It's all about tailoring their environment to meet their specific needs.
All right, let's move on to food. What should we be feeding these little guys?
Well, the guide recommends commercial turkey or game bird diets
Okay.
as the best option. They're specifically formulated to provide the right balance of protein, energy, and calcium.
So it's like a complete nutrition package.
Exactly.
Do their nutrient requirements change as they grow?
They do. For example, for the first 6 weeks, quail chicks need a diet with about 25% protein,
Okay.
12.6 megajoules of metabolizable energy per kilogram, and 1% calcium.
Wow, those are some specific numbers.
They get very technical in this guide. It's impressive.
It is very thorough. So those are the numbers for chicks.
Right.
What about for adult birds?
As they mature, those calcium and phosphorus levels need to increase, especially for laying hens.
Makes sense. They need that extra calcium for their eggshells, right?
Exactly. It's all about giving them the nutrients they need to thrive.
And we got to make sure that feed is fresh, right?
Absolutely. Always make sure they have access to fresh feed and that it's stored properly to prevent spoilage. Rancid feed can be harmful to their health.
Good point. Okay, so we've got housing, light, and nutrition covered.
We're making good progress.
What about general husbandry practices?
You know those everyday things that keep our quail happy and healthy?
Exactly. Any tips?
Well, the basics are pretty simple. They need constant access to dry food and clean water, gentle handling to avoid stressing them out.
Okay, so be nice to your quail.
Always. And of course, protect them from predators.
Of course.
The guide mentions that moving laying hens to a new location can actually cause a temporary pause in egg production.
Oh, interesting. So they don't like change.
Not really. They thrive on consistency and routine.
Makes sense. And we should probably avoid introducing new birds into an established group, right?
Yeah, that's a good idea. It can trigger those territorial instincts and lead to fighting.
Nobody wants a quail fight club.
Exactly.
Okay, last but not least, let's talk about disease prevention and control.
The cornerstone of good quail keeping.
Absolutely. What are the key takeaways?
Well, sanitation is paramount.
Right. Keeping things clean.
Exactly. Regular cleaning and disinfection of all their equipment and their living space are essential.
So we're talking about a deep clean.
Yes, exactly. Feeders, waterers, cages, any surfaces they touch need to be scrubbed, rinsed, and disinfected regularly.
Oh.
And the guide recommends using a commercial disinfectant that's specifically formulated for poultry. Always follow the manufacturer's instructions.
Sounds like good advice.
It is. It's all about being proactive and minimizing the risk of infections.
So we're basically treating their environment like we would our own homes when it comes to preventing the spread of germs.
That's a good way to think about it.
Okay, so we're keeping things clean, but what about preventing diseases from coming in from the outside?
That's where biosecurity comes in.
Right, tell us more.
Limiting visitors to your quail operation is a good start.
Okay, so less quail meet and greets.
Exactly. And whenever you enter their space, make sure you're wearing clean clothing and footwear.
So we're treating it like a hospital for birds.
That's a great analogy. We want to minimize the risk of bringing anything in from the outside world.
Makes sense. Are there any specific diseases that affect Japanese quail that we should be aware of?
They can be susceptible to some of the same diseases that affect chickens.
Oh, okay.
So those biosecurity measures we talked about are super important.
Got it.
And if you notice any signs of illness in your birds,
Okay, like what kind of signs?
things like lethargy, loss of appetite, respiratory distress, diarrhea, any changes in egg production.
So basically, any changes in their normal behavior.
Exactly. Those are all red flags.
Yeah.
If you notice anything unusual, isolate the affected birds immediately and contact a veterinarian.
Better to be safe than sorry.
Absolutely. Early detection and intervention are crucial.
The guide also mentions that you should remove any dead birds from the flock immediately.
Yes, that's important too.
It's sad. It is, but necessary to prevent the spread of disease, right?
Exactly.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground today. Incubation, brooding, housing, nutrition, disease prevention.
We've been busy.
It's clear that raising Japanese quail requires knowledge and attention to detail.
It does, but it's not rocket science.
Right. Anyone can do it if they're willing to learn.
Exactly. And this guide from the New South Wales Department of Primary Industries is a fantastic resource.
Yeah, it's amazing how much information is packed into this one document.
They really did a great job.
They did.
It's so well organized and easy to understand.
Yeah, even for someone like me who's only dabbled in chickens before.
Right. It's a great starting point for anyone interested in raising quail.
Well, this deep dive has definitely given me a whole new appreciation for these little birds.
They are pretty amazing, aren't they?
They are.
And they have so much potential.
Yeah, it's not just about raising birds. It's about understanding their role in a bigger system.
Exactly.
Sustainable food system.
Right.
And that's something we can all be a part of.
Absolutely.
Well, this has been fascinating.
I agree.
And I think we've only just scratched the surface.
There's always more to learn. You know, it's
Yeah.
amazing how much they cover in this guide. Really thorough.
I know, right? It's like they thought of every single detail when it comes to raising these birds.
It is. Like even that little tip about introducing quail groups in a new space
Oh, yeah.
to reduce that territorial behavior.
That's smart.
It is.
It's like giving them a fresh start.
Exactly. Avoid those turf wars right from the beginning.
I like it. You know, one thing I wanted to circle back to
Yeah.
was the incubation process.
Okay.
Because they talk a lot about those incubator controls.
They do. It's important.
Yeah, and it can seem a bit daunting, all those settings.
It can be, yeah. But the guide does a good job of explaining those two main types of incubators.
The forced draft
Mm-hmm.
and the still air.
Right, and how to use them properly.
But even with that forced draft incubator, you still have to turn those eggs regularly. And I'm curious, why is that? You'd think with all that fancy air circulation,
Yeah.
you wouldn't need to turn them.
Well, it's not just about temperature,
Okay.
though that is important. Turning actually prevents that embryo from sticking to the shell membrane.
That makes sense.
So, you know, it helps ensure they have a consistent supply of nutrients and oxygen as well.
It's like giving them a little turn and stretch.
Exactly. Imagine if you were stuck in one position for days on end, it wouldn't be comfortable.
Yeah, definitely not. So how often should you be turning those eggs?
Ideally, every 2 to 4 hours in a forced draft incubator.
Okay.
But in a still air incubator, you're going to be turning them manually
Right.
at least 3 times a day, maybe even more.
Wow, that's a lot.
It is. It's a bit more hands-on, but hey, those healthy chicks are worth it.
Absolutely. Now, speaking of different approaches to hatching,
Yeah.
I loved that part about using a broody hen.
Oh, yeah. That's a cool option.
It's just amazing to me that a hen will take on those tiny quail eggs.
I know, right? Nature is so fascinating.
And those bantam hens, they're like the perfect size for the job.
They are. They're less likely to crush those delicate eggs.
Now, one thing I wanted to ask about was that feather picking and cannibalism.
Okay, yeah.
Because that can be a problem, right?
It can be, unfortunately.
Especially in cages.
Yeah, crowded conditions can definitely contribute to that.
So what causes it? What can we do to prevent it?
Well, a lot of it comes down to stress and lack of stimulation.
Okay.
Overcrowding, obviously,
Right.
but also nutritional deficiencies.
Interesting.
Even just boredom can be a factor.
So they need things to do.
They do. They need enrichment.
Like what? Quail toys?
Well, maybe not toys exactly, but things to peck at, explore, interact with.
Like what kind of things?
You know, dust bathing areas, perches.
Okay.
Even just simple things like hanging a cabbage for them to peck at.
That's a good idea.
It keeps them stimulated and prevents boredom.
So it's like creating a little quail playground.
Exactly. Give them something to do.
That makes sense. Now, we talked about light cycles for egg production.
Right. Got to keep those eggs coming.
But is there anything else to consider about light when it comes to their overall well-being?
You know, there is. We talked about 14 to 18 hours of light per day for optimal egg laying.
Yeah.
But too much light can actually be stressful for them.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it might even contribute to those unwanted behaviors.
Like the feather picking.
Exactly. So it's all about finding that sweet spot
The right kind of light.
and the right amount.
Now, the guide also brings up beak trimming as a potential solution.
Yeah, that's a bit of a controversial topic.
It is. What are your thoughts on that?
It's definitely a last resort
Okay.
after you've tried everything else.
Right.
I think it's important to really weigh those potential benefits against the ethical concerns.
Absolutely.
You know, the guide explains the proper technique if you do decide to go that route,
Okay.
but it should only be done by someone who's experienced.
Right. Someone who knows what they're doing.
Yeah. And remember, it's not a cure-all.
Right. It's just one tool in the toolbox.
Exactly.
Speaking of tools, those general husbandry basics are pretty important, aren't they?
They are. Fresh food, clean water,
Yeah.
gentle handling. Those are the cornerstones of good quail care.
It's all about minimizing stress and creating that calm, predictable environment.
Exactly.
Stress can really weaken their immune system.
Yeah, it
And
can.
make them more susceptible to disease.
It's all about treating them with respect and understanding their needs.
Now, any other practical tips for minimizing stress?
Avoiding sudden loud noises is a good one.
Okay.
And excessive handling. And we already talked about overcrowding.
Right. Give them their space.
Yeah. And remember, moving those laying hens to new quarters.
Yeah.
That can disrupt their routine,
Okay.
and it can lead to a pause in egg production.
They really are creatures of habit, aren't they?
They are. Routine is key.
So let's dive a little deeper into disease prevention and control.
Okay.
Sanitation is key. We talked about that.
Absolutely fundamental.
But what does a deep clean for quail actually look like?
It's a spa day for the quail coop.
Okay, I like it.
Everything gets cleaned and disinfected. Feeders, waterers, cages, any surfaces they touch.
So we're scrubbing, rinsing, disinfecting.
The whole 9 yards.
Okay,
And using that commercial disinfectant, the one specifically formulated for poultry.
right. Always follow those instructions.
Always.
It's like we're taking all the precautions we take in our own homes to prevent the spread of germs.
Exactly. It's all about creating a healthy environment for those birds.
Now, how do we prevent diseases from coming in from the outside?
Biosecurity.
Yeah.
That's where we limit visitors.
Okay, so no more unnecessary quail meet and greets.
And when we do enter their space, we're wearing clean clothes, clean footwear.
So we're treating it like a hospital for birds.
Exactly. Minimize that risk of bringing in anything from the outside world.
Now, what about those diseases that chickens and quail share?
Right. Well, you got to be on the lookout for any changes in their behavior or appearance.
Okay, like what?
Lethargy, loss of appetite, respiratory distress, diarrhea, changes in egg production.
So any changes in their normal behavior are a red flag.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And if you notice anything unusual,
Yeah.
isolate those birds immediately
Right.
and contact a veterinarian.
Better safe than sorry.
Exactly. Early detection and intervention are crucial.
The guide also mentions removing any dead birds from the flock immediately.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's necessary.
It's a sad reality, but it's important for the health of the rest of the birds, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Got to protect the flock.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
From incubation techniques
Right.
to biosecurity measures.
A whole lot of information.
It's clear that raising Japanese quail requires knowledge and attention to detail.
It does, but it's also really rewarding.
It is.
You know, seeing those little chicks hatch
Yeah.
and watching them grow into healthy, productive birds.
It's a fascinating process.
It is.
This guide from the New South Wales Department of Primary Industries, it's really an amazing resource.
It is so much great information all in one place.
It's really well written, too.
Yeah, it's clear, concise.
And it's easy to understand, even for someone who's new to quail.
Absolutely.
Well, this deep dive has really opened my eyes to the possibilities of raising Japanese quail.
They're more than just cute little birds.
Right, they have a lot of potential.
They do.
And it's not just about raising birds, it's about understanding their role in a sustainable food system.
Exactly. They're part of a bigger picture.
And that's something we can all be a part of.
Absolutely. It's all about making informed choices about our food.
And our impact on the planet.
Exactly.
So what do you say? Are you ready to get a quail flock of your own?
You know, after this deep dive, I'm seriously considering it.
Me too. They're just so fascinating.
And they're delicious.
Bonus. All right, let's take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll wrap up our quail adventure and explore some additional resources for our listeners.
Hey there, Quailcast listeners. We're so glad you're here with us today. Before we dive back into the conversation, we've got a quick ask for you. If you're loving the show, whether it's the stories, the insights, or just the vibe, we'd love your support to keep this podcast soaring. Here's how you can help. First, head over to Spotify or any other podcasting platform and hit that follow button on Quailcast. It's the easiest way to make sure you never miss an episode. Plus, it helps us grow and bring you even more of the content you love. And second, swing by our website at quailcast.com. That's quailcast.com. It's your one-stop shop for show notes, bonus content, and ways to connect with us. Your support means the world to us, and it's what keeps this little quail flock thriving. Thanks for being part of the Quailcast. Let's continue on to the podcast.
Welcome back, everyone. You know, after all that talk about quail, I'm starting to think I need a flock of my own. What do you think?
I wouldn't be surprised. They are pretty captivating. It's amazing how much potential they have.
Right. We talked about their egg production and how adaptable they are to smaller spaces, but could they play a bigger role, in making our food systems more sustainable?
It's an intriguing thought, isn't it? Think about it. More people having access to fresh, local quail eggs and meat. That could be a game changer.
It could, especially with the rise of urban farming and backyard homesteading and all that. It fits right in.
It does. More and more people want to know where their food's coming from and reduce their impact.
Exactly. And quail, they tick a lot of those boxes, right? Easy to care for, don't need a ton of space, good source of protein.
Plus, you gotta admit, they're pretty darn cute.
They are, but it's more than just their cuteness. I think they could be a real solution.
Yeah.
This guide has given us a good starting point. It has. It's amazing what a little bit of information and education can do.
Right. Empowering people to make choices about their food, their impact.
Exactly.
Maybe someone listening will even start their own quail flock because of all this. Wouldn't that be something?
I'd love to see it. So much potential waiting to be unlocked.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into the world of Japanese quail.
It's been a fantastic journey.
It has. And remember, folks, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those deep dives going. Who knows what you'll uncover?
Welcome to Quailcast, the podcast for bird lovers, conservationists, and anyone curious about the quirky world of quails. Whether we're diving into their unique behaviors, uncovering how these little ground dwellers shape ecosystems, or sharing tips to protect their habitats, we're here to celebrate nature's underrated heroes. But it's not just about quails. It's about the communities fighting to save them. Join us for stories of backyard rehabbers, scientists, and everyday folks making a difference. Ready to flock with us? Follow Quailcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your shows. And never miss a story. New episodes drop weekly, so hit subscribe. Visit quailcast.com for updates. And let's give quails the spotlight they deserve. Stay grounded.